Do we live in a multiverse, and can we infer it from fine-tuning? That's the theme for today's 2-on-2 debate, with philosophers Philip Goff and Kenny Boyce arguing no, and Neil Manson and Darren Bradley arguing yes. Now, rather than focus on the scientific case that's covered in chapter 2 of my book, Battle of the Bang, we've really been debating whether fine-tuning supports the multiverse. So fine-tuning suggests that if the constants of nature were even slightly different, life couldn't exist. So life-emitting universes are said to be improbable. Now, at first glance, the multiverse looks like an obvious explanation. A single winning lottery ticket is unlikely, but if many tickets are sold, a win isn't surprising. Likewise, if there are many universes, at least one may be life-emitting, and that's exactly where we would expect to find ourselves according to what's called anthropic reasoning. So surveys of physicists that I've been involved with shows the multiverse is a very popular explanation of fine-tuning, second only to the idea that the constants are brute facts that need no explanation. But Philip Goff recently made waves in Scientific American arguing that, quote, experts in the mathematics of probability have identified the inference from fine-tuning to the multiverse as an instance of fallacious reasoning. And that's a claim supported by papers published by Kenny Boyce and others. And Philip went on, Capturing Christianity, to defend that view. But Neil and Darren, they've published papers arguing the opposite. And they starred in the video that I made replying to Philip. So we are going to have it out right here, right now. So, Philip, why don't you kick us off? What is this fallacy that you think the multiverse commits?
Thanks, Phil. Well, just to say first, thanks for having this opportunity to write a reply, as it were, and thanks for the initial engagement with the video. It was really cool video. And as Oscar Wilde said, the only thing worse than being talked about is not being talked about. But yeah, I mean, it is a huge, decades-long technical debate here. But the nice thing is it kicks off with a nice analogy that kind of gets you in the spirit of it. So let's suppose me and Neil go to a casino tonight. I think I'd quite like to go to a casino with Neil, actually. Maybe we could do it sometime. And as we walk in, there's a small room that we walk into, and there's somebody in that room who has just had an incredible win. Maybe they roll 5 sixes. I don't know how these games work, but some incredible stroke of luck, and we just come in and just see that. And then I say to Neil, wow, the casino must be full tonight. Must be thousands of people in it. And Neil says, what are you talking about? We've just seen this one guy in this one room. What's that got to do with the rest of the casino? And I say, well, if there's thousands of people playing in the casino, then it's not surprising that someone's going to win big. And that's what we've just seen. So confirms there's a full casino. Now, everyone agrees that's fallacious reasoning. It's what's called the inverse gambler's fallacy. It's kind of a backwards version of the traditional gambler's fallacy. And then the thought is, and this began with Ian Hacking in the 80s, the reasoning of a multiverse theorist looks kind of suspiciously similar, or at least a multiverse theorist who's just looking at the fine-tuning and inferring to a multiverse from that. So it looks like that kind of multiverse theorist is saying, oh my God, our universe has exactly the right numbers for life against incredible odds. We won the cosmic lottery. There must be loads of other universes with crappy numbers, right? To make sense of that. So it looks like something similar going on, because just as I said in my analogy, oh my God, someone's won big. We've observed someone winning big. There must be lots of other people winning not so big. So the multiverse theorist says, oh my God, our universe won big. There must be other universes that did not so well. So there's a big discussion here, but that's the first step into it, I think. So maybe I'll hand over to you guys.
Right. Neil, why don't you pick it up? Why doesn't the multiverse commit this?
I just asked Philip first to answer. He explained it beautifully. To explain the difference between the case he described and a similar case, suppose you're on social media and you're scrolling, and of course they've got all these accounts showing people at casinos, and you're scrolling and you see a video of somebody getting a royal flush. it seems that in that circumstance, it's very reasonable to think, there must be a lot of people out there filming themselves gambling, and that's why I'm seeing one of these exceptional cases where a royal flush is dealt. So, why can just give it back to Philip or Kenny? Can you explain why the situation with us and our universe is being fine tuned for life is more like the case you described, where you're sort of live and in person versus seeing it on video? That might help the audience.
Yeah, no, this is a really important point, and I think this is really going to be perhaps the core of the debate. Maybe it would help just to get into the space of where me and Kenny are thinking about this, to stick with the casino and modify the casino example so that it fits the kind of case I think you're thinking of, Neil. And if it doesn't fit, you can pull me up on that. So here's a case me and Kenny call the summoning case, right? So suppose we're hanging around. Here's the setup. We're hanging around outside the casino, and the bosses who run the casino, what they're doing, they're on CCTV footage observing all the players in the whole casino. And as soon as someone wins big, they're going to come outside and say, right, come in now, come in and observe them. Okay, and let's say we're waiting outside 30 seconds and they call us in to see someone winning really big, rolling 5 6s. Now, this seems on the face of it like a nice example for you guys. Why? Because there's a kind of selection effect, right? In the initial casino example, there was no selection effect. Like we happened to observe someone winning big. We could have walked in and observed someone winning rubbish, not winning big. And that seems to contrast with the multiverse case, where we couldn't have observed a universe that didn't have the right numbers for life, right? Because if it didn't have the right numbers for life, there'd be no one around to look at it. So this summoning case has a sort of artificial selection effect. With that setup, we couldn't have observed anything other than someone winning big, right? Because if no one had won big, we'd just be hanging around outside. Just as in the real world case of fine tuning, if no universe had got the right numbers for life, no one would have observed it. And furthermore, it does look very plausible that in the summoning case, you do get confirmation for a full casino, right? If we're dragged in straight away to see someone winning 5 6s, it's plausible to think there's loads of people playing, because that makes it more likely that someone's going to do that and we'll be dragged in to see them. So this looks good for you guys, right? This looks good for you guys. Okay, now let me just draw you into how me and Kenny are thinking about this right now. So we're writing a paper on this together, actually, with Mark O'Brien. Mark O'Brien is on your side of the debate, but his challenges have been so important to developing our thought. We've brought him into the collaboration. Okay, so really what we think is there's a little problem with this analogy, this summoning case. And it goes back to something Roger White said in the year 2000. Here's the worry with the summoning case. It's inevitable that if somebody wins big in the casino, I'm going to get to see them, right? I'm going to get to see them. Now, if we apply that to the real world case of fine tuning, that is analogous to, as long as there's a fine tuned universe somewhere in the multiverse, I'm going to be in it. I'm going to be born in it. And that doesn't seem true, right? My birth is incredibly improbable. My parents had to meet, my parents' parents had to meet, and so on. Just because there's a universe somewhere with the right numbers for life, it doesn't mean I'm going to be in it. Philip Goff, there could be some aliens or something. Okay, so here's me and Kenny, and this is the final bit. Me and Kenny have tweaked the summoning case a little bit to account for this. So this is the final bit. This is what we call the crowd summoning case, okay? Imagine, again, you're hanging out around outside the casino, but this time there's a huge crowd of people, huge number, thousands of people. And what the casino bosses are going to do, they're observing everyone on CCTV. When they see somebody winning big, they come out and they randomly pick someone from the crowd. Okay? So the advantage of this is this now I think, gets the reality better because it captures the fact that I might not have existed. It was still random that even if there's a fine-tuned universe and someone's going to observe it, it was random that it was going to be me. Okay, so that's our case that we think captures the reality of the fine-tuning evidential situation better. And once you run the maths with this, we found out, more Kenny than me, that it has a quite striking, intriguing result.
Okay, so, well, why don't we hand it over to Darren, as he hasn't spoken yet, and tell us what you think about this case, and how does it relate? Does this capture fine-tuning properly? Is it analogous? What's going on?
Yeah, so I like the summoning case. I think that it captures the intuition that Philip and Kenny want. But I do think there's a mistake in the reasoning. I think it's not quite analogous to the multiverse case. If we're assuming that us could only be in this universe, then fine, then it works. But the thing is, I don't think it's the case that we could only have been in this universe, or that we could only have been summoned to see a particular role. I think the way to think about it is, well, what's the space of possible evidence that we could get? Right. So we found we're in a universe. We could have found that we're in any universe with the right constants for life. So I don't think there's any necessary connection between what we observe, between our evidence and being in one particular universe. So I don't think it's inevitable that we would have to find that we're in this universe. I think the way to think about it is that we've found we're in some other universe with the right constants for life. Now, the more universes there are with the right constants for life, the more opportunities there are for us to exist and observe these universes. And that's pretty much all I think that's needed for our evidence to confirm the multiverse hypothesis. We just need it to be more likely for us to get our evidence given that there's a multiverse compared to given that there's a universe. So I don't need to say that it's inevitable that I'm chosen, that I'm summoned, that I exist. It just needs to be the case that the more universes there are, the greater the chances of my observations getting made. And that's what does seem to be the case with the multiverse. The more multiverses there are, the more chances there are for me to exist, for someone with my observations to exist. And that's enough for the multiverse to be confirmed.
Right. Kenny, do you want to reply to what Darren said?
Yes. So we want to grant, for the sake of argument, that you could have existed in other universes, that you had some chance of existing in other universes. Our crowd summoning case is actually meant to capture what the situation looks like if that's true. So everybody's out in the crowd, and let's say Neil, who just was at a poker tournament, I saw on Facebook, Neil wins big. And if Neil wins big, what they're going to do is they're going to randomly select one of us from the crowd. Could be me, could be somebody else. And they're going to escort me to see Neil. If Philip wins big, same procedure. So I've got some shot of seeing Neil. I've got some shot at seeing Philip. Here's the interesting thing about what the math shows for the crowd summoning case. It does show that you get evidence that the casino is full. But it also shows that the probability of someone winning big does not matter. That ends up canceling out in the equation. So if we take the analogy to the fine-tuning case, what we get is the result that if the fine-tuning case really is analogous, we get the result that our mere existence, or really the fact that we're observing a fine-tuned universe, is evidence for, or actually just observing a universe at all, is evidence for a multiverse, but fine-tuning has nothing to do with it. So if we're interested in a fine-tuning argument for the multiverse, as opposed to an argument from our mere existence, then I think that actually the proper analogy shows that you don't get a fine-tuning argument for a multiverse to work.
Right. Neil, do you want to come back on that? Because this is
Well,
really what we're debating.
I just,
Can we infer a multiverse from fine-tuning?
well, I just want to ask a more basic clarification, just to go back to the summoning case, if that's okay. So this event happens, and the casino bosses decide to select somebody from the crowd, and that person happens to be me. It's a large crowd of people, and it happens to be me. Does that fact need explanation at all? That it was me that was randomly selected from the crowd? You and I take it, Kenny, that you and Philip think that that's something that needs to be explained and isn't being explained, and I just don't think it needs to be explained at all. But maybe this is where we differ. Can you elaborate on that? I just don't see anything special about that.
I'll say something.
Before you interrupt, I just want to clarify something. Is this like, if suppose I win the lottery, I might, is your objection, Neil, that, well, look, it's weird that someone won the lottery, but if I find this lottery tickets bought, no surprise, then I ask, but it doesn't explain why I won the lottery. And what, Neil, you're asking is, why do you need an explanation why
do you need an explanation for that? Yeah. I mean, there could be some special circumstances where you'd need an explanation, like I'm the son of the administrator of the National Lottery or some such thing. But setting aside that, I think it's just it does not need to be explained at all.
I think I'll say something briefly, and then maybe Kenny can say a better. Let me say again. I'll just say something briefly. I think it's hard to have these arguments in the language of explanation, because kind of explanation can mean all sorts of things, or what needs explaining, what doesn't. That's why I think you get, it doesn't settle all the answers, but it provides a bit of discipline to the discussion to just put it in terms of Bayesian confirmation. That's what we're saying. So we're not making an argument about explanation. We're just saying, what happens if you have this crowd summoning analogy? What would the maths look like? And if that fits the real world case of fine tuning, that's what we should think is the case. Kenny, do you think add to that?
Yeah, I agree with that. We shouldn't. Intuitions about what needs explaining, what counts as an explanation, they're all quite murky. And so the nice thing about these analogies is that we can just look at the math for the probabilities and see what happens. And it turns out that in this case, fine-tuning just doesn't matter at all for how strong our evidence is for a multiverse hypothesis. And I want to say, I can go into some intuitive explanations, but if you really want to see like the nitty-gritty details of that, I have on my website, kennethboyce.wordpress.com. There's a tab media appearances, and I posted a supplementary document in which I explain the math there.
Right. Darren, do you want to pick this up? What do you think is happening here?
Yeah, I may well agree with that. I mean, so I've got a paper in which I get into the question. I mean, I'm responding to a paper of Jonathan Weisberg, who argues that the fine-tuning doesn't matter. And I argue that the more fine-tuned the constants turn out to be, the greater the confirmation we get. But that's in the context of comparing multiverse with design. When we're just comparing it with, that'd be comparing, I think, a single universe with design, different to comparing a single universe with a multiverse. So yeah, you may get the result that it's just, we get confirmation that there are lots of universes, and it just is irrelevant that we've got a universe with the right constants, with narrowly tuned constants, that we have kind of laws in which only a narrow range of values for the parameters allows life. I mean, that's super interesting, and I have to have a look at the maths and the assumptions that you get. I remember being convinced by Jonathan Weisberg's reply to me that the fine-tuning doesn't matter so much. I realize this isn't much good for a video for the public. But yeah, that's kind of where I am on this.
But I just want to just clarify what you're saying, Darren. So you're saying that if we compare, which one was it, the multiverse versus the design, or multiverse versus single universe, which one is coming out on top in your opinion?
Yeah, so I do think the questions get resolved differently, right? So one debate is compare a single universe versus design, right? So does our observation of the fine-tuning of the constants, does it favor a design single universe over a random single universe? That's one question. A separate question is, does our evidence of fine-tuning favor a random single universe over random lots of universes? And we may well end up with different answers to those questions, right? The evidence may well confirm design over single universe, but not confirm multiverse over single universe. So I think those questions do need to be separated.
But Philip, I just want to bring you back here, because if I remember rightly, you sent me an email saying that you think multiverse beats single universe, but it doesn't beat design. Am I remembering that correctly? And then how does that affect the inverse gambler's fallacy? Because I understood it that the inverse gambler's fallacy was real, then you should be indifferent between a single universe and a multiple universe.
So I think, I mean, my thinking has evolved a lot on this and may change further. But where I'm up to at the moment is I think it's very important what is doing the evidential work. So what Kenny and I are saying is maybe there is evidence for a multiverse in this vicinity, but it's nothing to do with the fine-tuning. It's just from the mere fact that our universe exists, or the mere fact that I exist, right? This particular individual. And you might think, well, why does that matter? As long as we're getting a multiverse, then we don't need God. No, it does matter, because depending on what is the source of evidence, it's going to make a difference to what multiverse you end up with. So I've talked a lot about there's two kinds of multiverse, what I call homogeneous and heterogeneous, right? So in a homogeneous multiverse, all the universes have the same local physics, and so they're all fine-tuned for life. That's not the one multiverse theorists tend to go for. They tend to go for heterogeneous multiverse, where there's different local physics, and then it's very rare that you get the right numbers for life. Now, so it's the heterogeneous one you're likely to go for if you're thinking, I need an explanation of fine-tuning that doesn't gets rid of God. But if what you're trying to explain is just why Philip Goff exists, then you're going to go for the homogeneous multiverse, because there's more universes that is compatible with life. There's more chance I'm going to be in them. And then you're going to end up, so you might end up with a multiverse, but you'll end up with a multiverse where the whole bloody thing is fine-tuned, and then you need God. So what we're saying is maybe there's evidence for a multiverse, but it's not the kind of multiverse that's going to get rid of the fine-tuning argument for God, roughly.
Neil, do you want to reply to that?
Well, I'm not. So first of all, I need to see the calculations that Kenny and Philip performed before I can comment on that. Second, I just keep going that I have such a basic disagreement, I guess, with Philip and Kenny. So maybe this is a slight change of topic, but let me introduce just another. This is a real life case, and then tell me where we've gone wrong. Okay, so in the history of science, it's not until quite recently that we knew that there were planets around other stars, right? I think we only started finding that out about 30 years ago. But much before that, we came to know that there are some very special properties of the planet Earth, right? It's in the so-called Goldilocks zone, so it's in the right place to have liquid water. It's a little bit closer, it would be steam. A little bit farther away, it would be ice. It's got a molten iron core, which provides a magnetic field, which does a lot of work. It's got a moon that turns out to be very crucial to the development of life, gas giant outer planets, all that kind of stuff. And people used to make design arguments from that phenomenon to the existence of a creator of the solar system. Now, being aware of all of those facts about the solar system but not knowing whether there were any planets at all around any other stars, was it reasonable in that epistemic situation to think that the fine tuning of our planet for life is reason to think that probably there are a lot of other solar systems out there that have planets with, that are varying distances from their star, so that there are a lot of chances for things to end up just right, like they are here. I I I think a lot of scientists reasoned that way. The people who are looking at exoplanets, where did they go? Where did they go wrong?
Kenny, do you want to reply to that?
Yeah, so that there are a couple things. So first, I think that people were right to take the fact that our planet had these special properties to be evidence for design when they didn't know about the existence of these other planets. And also, they didn't know how life was distributed across the universe. So I think, had they looked out there and they had seen, not only is our planet, does it have these special features, but these special features are everywhere. The universe is just teeming with life. I think that would be even stronger evidence for design. But in fact, what they looked out and saw was that life is a pretty rare phenomenon. And the distribution of planets with these special properties to planets with non-special properties is basically what you might expect if it just all kind of happened by chance. And then I think once they learned that did undermine the design inference. So I don't think the people making the design argument went wrong. I do think that the physicists who thought that, or the astrophysicists who thought that they had evidence that there was a heterogeneous universe of planets from the mere fact that our planet had these special properties, I think they were making a fallacious inference. But as I tell my students, when we discuss arguments, you can have bad arguments for true conclusions, and they turned out to be right.
Darren, any thoughts on this planet example?
Yeah, I don't think I followed Kenny's position. Right, so I take it, like Neil was pushing the view that a discovery that we find ourselves on a planet with the right constants for life confirms that there's a big universe with lots of stars and lots of planets. So do you agree with that inference?
I don't agree that it confirms that there is a heterogeneous universe with a diverse, like with a large distribution of life permitting to non-life permitting properties, everything you would expect by chance. I don't think it confirms that hypothesis. It might confirm the hypothesis that the universe is really big merely from the fact that we're here on this planet and not from the fact that it has those special features. Now, whether it does or not, I think that ultimately turns on some really subtle issues about how to think about self-locating belief, indexical evidence. But if we get any confirmation for a big universe at all from that evidence, it's not from the special properties of our planet. It's just from the fact that we're here or that our planet is here.
Right, Darren, because you were just asking Kenny the question rather than sort of replying to the argument. So do you want to just give your thoughts on what Kenny's saying here?
So I think I might agree with that. So it does seem right to say that we found a planet that has the right features for us to exist. And so that confirms that there's a big universe with lots of planets. So I think we're in agreement up to there. So then there's a further question. Well, there's lots of different ways the big universe might be, right? It might have lots of planets all the same. That's the homogeneous theory. It might have planets all being different. That's the heterogeneous theory. So it sounds like Kenny wants to say that only the homogeneous theory is confirmed. And that seems odd to me. I would have thought there's two versions of this theory, homogeneous and heterogeneous. The whole theory gets confirmed. I would have thought both parts of the theory gets confirmed. So I guess I want to know why the heterogeneous version of the theory is not confirmed.
Philip, do you want to reply to that, or do you want to throw it back to Kenny? Up to you.
Maybe Kenny can carry on and I'll
Kenny.
add some.
Okay, yeah. So I think this planet analogy is exactly analogous to the multiverse case. That's why Neil raised it. And I think on the assumption that we could have existed on different planets, or on the assumption that we could have existed in different universes, it's analogous to the crowd summoning case that we discussed. And in the crowd summoning case, the probability that our universe has a special properties, or our planet has a special properties, or the analog of that in the crowd summoning, the probability of winning big, it just drops out. It is it's irrelevant to how strong your evidence is for the multiverse. So actually, a multiverse gets confirmed, or multi-planet gets confirmed, the same amount, whether we think that it's a heterogeneous universe or a homogeneous universe. But it gets confirmed the same amount from the mere fact that we're here. But then when we look at the fine-tuning data, actually, it's going to be a lot more likely that our planet is going to have the special properties if all the planets in the big universe do, than if a lot of planets don't. It's going to be more likely that we exist if there are lots and lots of places where we could exist, than if there aren't that many places where we could exist. And so actually the fine-tuning information, it tends to confirm the homogeneous multiverse hypothesis over the heterogeneous multiverse hypothesis.
Well, they're both still up, right?
What's that?
They both get confirmed, right? The probability of both goes up, right?
That's right. They both get confirmed.
Okay.
Right, Neil, I see you're shaking
Well,
your head.
it's just I'm going to focus on the planetary case again. What you seem to be saying, Kenny, is the observation that our planet is just right for life is evidence that there is a law such that all planets, or maybe not every single planet, but every solar system has a planet where things are just right for life. But if something's a law, then you don't need there to be multiple instances of it. It's just a very different kind of explanation to say that it's a law. And I admit that could very well be the case. I'm just, why are you dissatisfied, or why is it not acceptable to go with the heterogeneous explanation, which again is, it's not just for this one case. It's a kind of explanation that is made all over the place in science. I think of evolutionary biology, for example. It seems like your reasoning would wipe out a lot of valid scientific inferences across a variety of domains.
Before you guys answer that, I just want to sort of comment on what was actually discovered, because I believe Paley was the one that made the argument that the Earth is in this special location that has certain properties. And then in the 1990s, we started to discover exoplanets. And what has, now with Kepler and other telescopes, what has been discovered is that there is probably planets around every star,
right,
and with a vast variety of different properties. In fact, weirdly, the planet that is the most common, I believe, is what's called a super Earth, a planet that doesn't even exist in our solar system. So what does these observations have? This is what the empirical evidence told us. How does that relate to this argument that's being made here?
Yeah. So I think, so Neil talked again about explanation, which I don't like to focus on. I think that what we discovered, though, when we discovered that, or what we got evidence for when we discovered that the universe was like this, that there's lots of non-life permitting regions, and the life permitting ones are what we expect by chance. I think we got evidence that there really isn't much of an explanation for why we in particular exist. It's just kind of a coincidence. There's an explanation for why other creatures exist, but not why we exist. Now, it might sound odd for me to say this because I'm on the fine-tuning argument for design side, and I'm a theist, but I try to be honest with how I think about the evidence. And I actually think the fact that we've learned that our universe is like this is some evidence against the existence of God, counterbalanced by other lines of evidence. Neil says that he thinks that my suggestion might undermine other kinds of scientific explanation. I guess I might want to see the argument for that filled out a little bit more, because it's not clear to me that that's true.
Neil, go on, answer that, and then I want to get Philip and Darren back in.
Okay. Well, just if you look at a standard explanation in evolutionary biology, we see a species that is successful. Let's say it's got some feature, whatever, wings or something, right? One way to go is to say that all of its ancestors had wings, and those wings had exactly that structure. That's the law explanation. And the other explanation is more of the chance plus a lot of trials explanation, which is what I associate with Darwinian evolutionary explanations. And that is, it was just massive trial and error, and the failures got weeded out. It's a selection effect. And that's why you see, highly sophisticated wings now in a creature. It just seems like that's a run-of-the-mill form of explanation in evolutionary biology. That's the kind of case I'm thinking of.
Philip, can you come back on this? It was
Yes,
undermined like evolutionary biology and all kinds of science.
Yeah. Let me get to that. There is another nuance here to further complicate this already complex debate, and this again goes back to Roger White and his very important paper from the year 2000. People on our side of the debate think you can't go from fine-tuning to a multiverse, but if on independent grounds you had reason to believe in this heterogeneous multiverse, that would undermine the fine-tuning evidence for God, right? And that's connected to what Kenny's just said. And the reason is, if we knew we were in this universe where life was very rare, where a fine-tuned, if we knew we were in this multiverse where fine-tuned universes are very rare, then that would be evidence that it's just chance, right? We wouldn't need God to explain why, this one is the fine-tuned one. So the argument would just be undermined. So there's two different points here, but that doesn't mean you can infer from fine-tuning to a multiverse. So look, where we just need to hone down here is, what are we trying to account for? What is the evidence? If it is the fact that our universe exists, or the fact that Philip Goff exists, then we'd go for a homogeneous multiverse, because there's more chance that I exist if there's more life-sustaining universes. And going to the analogy of when we only knew about our solar system, if we're trying to explain why does our Earth exist with life, you'd postulate a homogeneous universe with lots of life in the universe, because then it's more likely you get life on Earth. Whereas if you're trying to deal with fine-tuning, then you might be... and I think that's what's going on with a lot of physicist multiverse theorists. They're trying to deal with fine-tuning and not get God in the picture. Then you go for the heterogeneous one. So we just need to pin down what is needing to be accounted for. And that's where we get to the maths. We can have these intuitions about explanation, or we can just run the maths. And the summoning case, yes, you do get support for the classical kind of the heterogeneous multiverse. But on the crowd summoning case, the fine-tuning becomes irrelevant. So to answer Neil's question, what about all these cases in science like evolution? I would say they're more like the basic summoning case. But that's not what the fine-tuning scenario is. The fine-tuning scenario is more like the crowd summoning case. And once you do the maths with that, fine-tuning is just irrelevant.
Darren, do you want to come in here, or should I put it back to Neil?
So I guess I can make a couple of comments. So one question is, what hypothesis is best supported by our evidence? And a different question is, which hypotheses get confirmed, which get boosted by our evidence? Right. So the hypotheses that get the most support are the ones which entail my existence, right? So a hypothesis that says, or any hypothesis that entails that I exist, that's going to get the most support, right? So if the hypothesis is there's a theistic being that really cares about me existing, that's going to get the most support from me existing. But of course, that has to be balanced against the initial probability, the prior probability, right? The other question is, which hypotheses are boosted at all by our evidence, right? So which get confirmed, which get their probabilities increased. And so one interesting feature, it sounds like Kenny and maybe Philip as well do agree that the heterogeneous hypothesis, that there are lots of different universes, that does get boosted by our evidence. So it might just be worth it. Can I get clarification about whether you do agree on that point? Because that seems one of the central claims that the multiverse theorist is making.
Kenny, do you want to reply to that? Does it?
Yeah. So I think, well, there are some complicated issues here, but given what we've granted in this debate, I think that it does. I think that whether that's ultimately true, like I said, depends on some really subtle issues about self-locating evidence. But I kind of want to grant, at least for the sake of argument, that our mere existence boosts the multiverse hypothesis as it would in the crowd summoning case boost the full casino hypothesis. And if the math works like that, then it boosts both the tables are all rigged, everybody gets to win big hypothesis, and it boosts the probability is really low hypothesis. It really just boosts hypotheses in general, according to which the casino is full, and the probability of winning doesn't matter.
Darren, do you want to follow up?
Yeah, so I mean, we may well be in agreement, right? So it sounds like the main point that the multiverse theorist wants to make is that our evidence confirms that there are lots of different other universes out there. So it seems like there's agreement on that point. And then there's some really interesting subtle matters about how much confirmation it gets and how big a deal it is, or whether it's a big deal at all, that we live in a fine-tuned universe, or whether any kind of universe could have supported life.
So your expression of our agreement is right, but it papers over an important disagreement. So we agree, at least in the context of this discussion, we're agreeing that our evidence supports the multiverse hypothesis, including the heterogeneous multiverse hypothesis. But, and here's the crucial point, the fine-tuning component of our evidence has nothing to do with it. So if we put the fact that we exist, or our universe exists in the background information, and then we bring in the fine-tuning evidence, the fine-tuning evidence is not going to give us any more confirmation for a multiverse hypothesis, just in line with, I think, what Hacking and White themselves were arguing.
Yeah, I mean, just to back that up, it is very briefly, there's a very important principle in probabilistic reasoning, the total evidence requirement, that you need to account for all of your evidence. So what I think Kenny and I have shown mathematically is that if there is evidence for a multiverse, it has nothing to do with fine-tuning. So taking into account all our evidence, maybe, okay, we get a multiverse from the fact that our universe exists. But then we also have to account for the fine-tuning. And that's just going to take you to God. So maybe you need God and maybe you get God and a multiverse. but you don't get rid of the fine-tuning argument for God.
Neil,
That's the claim.
thoughts? Do you get rid?
2 points. First, a quick one. The idea when looking at the planets case that it's homogeneous, that every solar system has Earth-like planets. As I said, that's basically saying there's some law that guarantees that there are Earth-like planets, and that possibility has been explored by the physicists, and they haven't been able to make it pan out with regards to fine-tuning. So you're right that fine-tuning does support the claim that there is some law that makes it the case that every universe is just right for life. It's just that physicists aren't talking about that nowadays because, I mean, there's still people plugging away at it, but they haven't been able to find a law or a set of laws that would yield that result. At least that's my understanding of the contemporary scene in physics. Maybe Phil Halper, you can speak to that,
actually,
but I think that's right?
Well, I think I can say something about that. I think there are certain proposals for something like that. So I just released a film on something called causal set theory, which is a proposal for quantum gravity. So the most famous case of fine-tuning, I think, is the cosmological constant. And in the causal set theory, it's actually predicted from the theory. So it's not unlikely at all. And in fact, they predicted the cosmological constant 10 years before it was discovered. And they made a further prediction that it should change over time. And in fact, there is new evidence. It's tentative. I don't want to claim this is definitively affirmed, but there's something called DESI, the Dark Energy Spectroscopic Instrument, that they're claiming that this is backed up, that it is changing over time. And the idea is it's like basically a feature of the quantum nature of space-time. So the cosmological constant would have the value that we see. It would change over time, and it would be positive and it would go negative. So in that sense, I think there is, and there are other cases like that. So for example, there's a theory called asymptotic safety, predicted the value of the mass of the Higgs. And the one other case that I think maybe we can talk about, because it's a different type of multiverse. So I would like to talk about this. And that's this notion of cosmological natural selection. And here the idea is that new universes are born from black holes, and black holes come from different things. But one of the ways black holes forms is stars collapsing. And so if you have more stars, then you get more universes. So there's like more progeny. And so if you have a sort of variation in the concept, it's very, very analogous to Darwinian natural selection, where you think, well, look, if I just throw the genes together randomly, I'm not going to get a life-promoting organism. But if there's a selection effect where the more ones that are better survive, then there will be. So I should just comment that in the standard multiverse case, we're using anthropic reasoning. So basically, there's lots of universes, lots of different universes. Some of them are life-limiting values, some don't, most of them don't. But hey, we only need a one that does, and we'll be in that one. That's the anthropic selection. But the natural selection is that no. Actually, in the anthropic one, life-limiting universes are very rare. Whereas in the Darwinian case, life-limiting universe would be very common. So is that what we're talking about here in sort of a law? So that's my thoughts on that. What do you think?
Okay. Yeah, well, is that Lee Smolin with the cosmic natural? Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm just, what I was trying to bracket is the background for talking about a heterogeneous multiverse just is that there's been an effort to come up with laws that has been perceived to have failed. And of course, it could be revived, and maybe people are working on it now. But if you take that as a given, then you're really you've narrowed down the possibilities to chance. That is, it's a brute fact. It's God, or it's a multiverse, a heterogeneous multiverse. So wanted to get some clarification about that. And then, Philip, you talked about the total evidence principle, and I feel like you've gone back and forth on something. You said the more universes there are, the more chances there are for you to exist. But I thought the essence, right, of the of this objection is that these other universes would be ones where I couldn't exist. That's what Roger White says over and over, right? That Yes, there may be other folks that in other universes that are very similar to me, but they wouldn't be me, and that's the evidence. So can you speak to that, please? I'm not really sure which of
Yeah.
those two ways you're going.
Yeah, I forgot to give Roger White's very vivid analogy for what's wrong with the basic summoning case that multiverse theorists tend to appeal to, or something like that. And he says it's as though that analogy suggests we were once disembodied souls floating through the multiverse. And then as soon as we find one that's fine-tuned, we slip into it and we're born. So that would be analogous to the casino where we're waiting outside. When someone wins, we get summoned in. So that's not the real world. That's not a good analogy. But then there's a big question here, which Neil's brought us to. Could I have existed in another universe or not? And I think Kenny and I are inclined to think, no, we couldn't. I had to come from a particular sperm and egg. I had to come from this universe. But for the sake of our discussion, we're prepared to concede that, oh yeah, maybe we could. And I know Darren's keen on that. Maybe we could have existed in other universes. So that's why we get to the crowd summoning, because that's supposed to accommodate that. There's all these people, right? And I could have been summoned in by Bob, by Bill, by Sarah, by Jane, and they represent different universes. So the crowd analogy is sort of a concession to you guys, a concession to Darren. It's supposed to accommodate his view that we could have existed in other universes. But if you go with the view Kenny and I have, that we could only have existed in one universe, then I think the right analogy is Philip Goff's Jane analogy. And that's what you discussed in the film, and I would like to discuss that actually. Is that an option?
Why don't we go to the Jane analogy? Because if Philip proposed this, we replied to it in our film. There'll be a link in the description. Philip, why don't you just unpack quickly what the Jane analogy is, and then we can get Neil or Darren to. Well, let's get Darren to reply because it was Neil's just been talking. Philip, unpack the Jane analogy. We'll have a bit of back and forth on that.
Yeah, I think I came up with this debating on Facebook with Tim Maudlin, who gets very grumpy. Anyway, so here's my story of Jane.
He's fierce.
What's that?
You could just say he's fierce.
Yes, he's a vigorous debater. Okay, I really like his work, by the way. So Jane was brought into existence through IVF, and then one day she finds out there was something a bit strange about her conception, right? The doctor who did it had it all ready to go, had the particular sperm and the particular egg ready to put them together. But this doctor was having some psychotic episodes, and maybe she'd been reading Camus on the absurd or something, and she decided to throw 5 dice, and she was only going to fertilize the egg if she got 5 sixes. And it happens the doctor did get 5 sixes, fertilized the egg. Jane comes into existence, right? Now, and Jane finds out about this, and she knows as a fact that this doctor only did this once, and got some therapy, and that was the end of it, right? Now, my question is, does she have reason to go for the many doctors hypothesis, that there are many doctors who have been doing IVF and rolling dice? I would say intuitively not. Now, I want to, just before I stop, I want to distinguish two importantly different questions here. One question is, what should Jane infer? Should Jane infer to the many doctors hypothesis? That's one question. The second question is, how well does this fit real world fine-tuning situation? Now, in your video, you dealt with the second question, and I disagree with you, and I'd like to say why. But I feel you dodged the first question. You never actually gave an answer of whether, in my Jane case, it would be rational for Jane to infer many doctors. So I would like to pin you down on an answer to that.
All right, Darren, do you want to talk about those two things that start with the first one?
So I guess my first thought is you've set up the case so that here's how Jane was brought into being, and here's what Jane knows about how she was brought into being. She was brought into being by this particular doctor. So that immediately eliminates the possibility that she was brought into being by a different doctor, right? So you told the story. She was brought into being by this doctor. Here's this weird procedure the doctor went through. Does that increase your probability, Jane, that there are lots of other doctors doing these weird things? And I think Jane can, in that case, say no, because you've told me from the beginning that I was brought into existence by this doctor. So that might be a way in which you're creating a necessary connection between that doctor and Jane, which I would deny exists between this universe and us.
Good point. Good point. So this gets to the heart of the issue that it implies, if you take the analogy to the real world fine-tuning case, it corresponds to the I couldn't have existed in another universe, right? That's how we've set it up. So there is that limit to it. And this is why Kenny and I go to the crowd case. But could we just hold on the could we make that assumption for the sake of discussion and just to find out what we think of that? So let's suppose, for the sake of discussion, each of us could not have existed in another universe, right? Do you then agree? So Darren's just given me an answer. It wouldn't be rational for Jane to infer many doctors. Now what I want to say is, given this assumption, for the sake of discussion, that none of us could have existed in another universe, we just came from a particular sperm, particular egg, I think that Jane scenario is now perfectly analogous to the most discussed inflationary multiverse, right? The most discussed inflationary multiverse, our universe had one shot of getting the numbers for life, right? Random processes or whatever, just as Jane's conception had one shot of happening. And so if Jane can't infer many doctors, I don't think we can infer many universes.
Hang on, I just want to clarify one thing, because obviously I've written a book about inflation cosmology, and I'm not quite sure where you get this. There's only one shot in the inflationary multiverse scenario. Like, there's an infinite number of universes. So actually, how many there should be, it depends on a measure which you don't have. So, like, okay, I'm not quite sure where you're getting that from. You've got to clarify that.
I mean, yeah, I think we're maybe misunderstanding each other. I'm saying our particular universe, i.e. our region of space-time, when it came into existence, when it had one, our region of space-time had one shot at getting the right numbers for life. That's what I'm saying. I'm not saying the whole multiverse. I'm saying our universe. And I think that's analogous to Jane's conception in particular. That's, yeah.
All right. Neil, do you want to say something on this?
Well, just a question for Philip. Again, I'm very puzzled by some of this stuff.
We all are.
You've got an image of some sort of, the term they use in cosmology is a foam, right? There's a foam, or maybe a quantum foam, and that there's something that makes a particular bubble in that foam be the bubble that it is, and then we can. That's other than just what constants it ends up displaying. There's something that makes it be the bubble that it is. What do you think that might be? Is there any, what do you think that might be that makes a bubble the bubble that it is? I've asked some cosmologists this, and I haven't really gotten a clear answer from them either. Maybe the whole idea is muddled. But I know you've written on this in what it might be, right? Can you elaborate on that for the audience?
I don't want to commit myself to too much. If you think this could make a difference to what I'm saying, then I'd be open to hear it. I suppose I could just talk about a region of space-time. The thing we call our universe is a region of space-time. Maybe there's a broader multiverse, maybe there isn't. And I appreciate the point that in some sense it's just one big universe on the cosmological inflation. But still, I can talk about our universe, meaning this region of space-time that began with what we call the Big Bang. Pick it out indexically, what we refer to, we talk about the Big Bang. That's what I'm talking about. And I'm saying that region of space-time had one shot at getting the right numbers for life, if I'm understanding correctly.
I just don't know how you point at the universe. I know how to point at this pencil. I get lost at that would be to point at the universe.
Can we refer to the Big Bang? Are you denying we can refer to the Big Bang?
I mean, I can talk about of course, a series of events that happens going in the past, but I tend to, I guess what I'm getting at is to say this one rather than that one. I don't know how I'm picking out a universe in contrast to other universes, but maybe I've just got a block on that.
I mean, there are tricky questions here. I wonder whether we're slipping back into intuitions about explanation, like why does this universe need explaining? And that's not what I'm getting at. I'm saying we can certainly refer to what we call the Big Bang, that particular event. That's all I'm saying.
It does feel like we're coming back to the lottery case, where it's like, do we need an explanation for why that lottery ticket won? Is that, am I getting this right here? Are we coming back to that? Darren, can you give us some independent thought on this?
Which is, I mean, I think I agree, right? So if we build in that we could have only existed in this universe, and also, if there's just one universe that exists, it's this one, and this is the only universe we could have been in. And whatever we discover about it, could it confirm that lots of other universes exist? No, perhaps not. Right. So I think I agree with you. If we build in that this is the only universe we can observe, then I think I agree that you don't get support for the multiverse.
So maybe me and Darren agree on everything. I mean, but just let me flag up. That's a very significant point, right?
One sec. So, but Darren, then, so the agreement is that you don't agree that that's the right setup. Is that where we're coming from?
I think we could have existed in a different universe.
Right. So that's where.
But Kenny and I are covering both cases, right? The Jane case is supposed to be the correct analogy. If we could only have existed in this universe, and Darren seems to be agreeing, in that case, we couldn't infer a multiverse. Now that's a very significant point, right? That to go for the multiverse, you have to believe we could have existed in other universes. That's just a significant point. But suppose we concede we could exist in other universes, then we go to the crowd summoning case, and there the result is maybe we have evidence for a multiverse, but it's nothing to do with fine-tuning, and so fine-tuning is still evidence for God, and only, let me say that again, if we want to deal with fine-tuning, it's got to be God, because a multiverse won't deal with it.
Take one thing, I just before come back on it, Darren, please. But one thing I want to address is something we had in the video, and there was this. Well, this is my idea, actually. So I don't want to get it addressed by all of you. And that is, suppose I discover the laws of reproduction, and I find out that most sperm do not fertilize an egg, right? And I also discover that the way I get born is a sperm fertilizes an egg. And now I'm like wondering, it's really weird. It's like a 1 in a billion chance of sperm fertilizes an egg. And I think to myself, well, maybe when, intercourse happens, lots of sperm are produced. And that's how I got fertilized. The egg got fertilized. Because if there's lots of sperm produced, no surprise that, one of them, I only need one of them to fertilize the egg. So I hypothesize that there's many sperm. And indeed, empirically, just like with the planet case, that's exactly the truth. So isn't that evidence that this line of reasoning is actually right? Who shall I throw this to? Philip, do you want to come on this? And then I think,
the example you're giving is closer to the basic summoning case, where it's whoever wins in the casino, it's inevitable that you're going to get summoned in. It's like cases where as long as someone does this amazing thing, they're going to get on YouTube, or they're going to get on the news, or as long as the sperm fertilizes the egg, oh, we're going to get a baby. It's these cases where there's a direct causal connection between the happening and this particular result. But that's not the reality of fine tuning, because that's why it's different in this crowd case where it's not inevitable that I would have existed. It's inevitable that someone would have existed, but it could have been anyone from this huge crowd. And as soon as you bring that in, you do the maths, fine tuning becomes irrelevant. Kenny could explain the intuitive behind that much better than I can. I
hopefully
find
he'll come back in. Hopefully he'll come back in.
It's you know, so I've gone through the maths, but he's all. I'm still trying to get my head around the intuitive reason for that. But
Darren,
yeah.
what were you going to say? And then I'll take it back to Neil and then back to Philip.
Yeah, so there were a couple of things I wanted to say in response to Philip just now. So first, there's an interesting, slightly technical point. I don't think I really need to say that we must have been able to exist in a different universe for the multiverse argument to go through. All I really need to say is some creature with my evidence could have existed in a different universe, right? So you can actually hold on to some kind of Kripkean necessity of origins thesis and say, I could only have existed in this universe, but someone a lot like me could have existed. Someone a lot like me could have existed in a different universe. That I think is actually enough. So that actually gives me a bit more leeway than I was offering before, because of this point. It's really about epistemology rather than metaphysics. Second claim is, do we get support for the multiverse? That I think is the central interesting claim. And you're saying, well, yeah, we do, but not because of fine tuning. Yeah, I might be okay with that. It's really interesting. I like the idea we might get a bit more with fine tuning. Maybe it depends on the numbers. Maybe we don't. But if our existence makes the multiverse more likely, that itself is really an interesting argument. But to zoom in on a point of disagreement, so one thing that you said, which is a bit puzzling. So you finish with the thought, we still need God to account for fine tuning. So I need that to be unpacked a bit, because presumably God doesn't care whether the universe is fine tuned or not, right? Fine tuning by itself isn't something that would make God's existence more likely. Presumably it's our existence is what makes God's existence more likely, because God cares about us existing. God doesn't care about fine tuning. So I'd need it to be unpacked. Why would the fact that we live in a fine-tuned universe support the existence of God?
Look, I didn't mean to say, of course, that there are no other responses to the fine-tuning argument for God, right? This is all I'm saying is that the multiverse can't undermine the argument. Also, it's important to say, I have a very flexible idea of God. I don't go for the very traditional God because of the problem of evil. I'm open to God being sort of teleological laws, maybe akin to what Neil was talking about. But then the question was, well, God doesn't explain why there's fine tuning, why life is sort of improbable, just why there is life. Yes, it's right. The evidence is not fine tuning, although sometimes we sloppily say it that way. The evidence is there is life against the background evidence that for there to be life, you have to get exactly the right numbers. And so it's pretty improbable, right? So, most Bayesian reasoning, you have stuff in the background knowledge that you take in for granted, and then you have the evidence. So once you have in the background knowledge that for life to be possible, we needed these numbers, then we focus on the evidence that these numbers came up. Then I think you've got evidential support for something God-ish. And people get suspicious of that. I find, professional philosophers will get suspicious of that. Oh, you're putting stuff in the background knowledge. But it's like, we always do that in Bayesian reasoning. It's like, why is it this one case we suddenly kind of ramp up the standards where, we're going to worry about that? Anyway, that was it.
Neil, why don't you come in? Yeah.
Okay. I just, I agree with Darren's framing of it as not my having this evidence, but someone with my evidence, or someone like me having my evidence is the right way to look at it. And now, Philip, I know you and Kenny said you don't like this language of explanation. You go back at the fine-tuning literature, of course, you'll see people like John Leslie did frame it in terms of explanation and the need for explanation. But I think there's some value in that language. I note that you use the term accounting for, which sounds like explanation to me. I think we can't really avoid talking about what it is that we're trying to explain. And that's not what we think needs explaining is not something that itself can just be cranked out of a Bayesian calculation machine, right? We make decisions about what's relevant and what's not. How many leaves are there on the quad at my school, right? That could be explained. We just don't think it's relevant. We don't think it needs to be explained. So yeah, I just coming back, I agree with Darren that I don't particularly care that it's me that exists or that it's human beings that exist, right? I take a step back and think about beings like us having evidence like ours. And I think from that perspective, a lot of the concerns that you have, what I've called the this universe objection, they just they're unmotivated. But I'll give you a chance to respond to that.
I don't think it makes a difference. Let's go back to the very basic casino case that we all agree is fallacious. That you just walk in and someone's wins big. We don't step back and say, well, my evidence is that someone saw someone winning big. You say you're obliged to work with the specifics of the situation. That's coming back again to total evidence requirement. But I mean, and Kenny has actually gone through the maths, just thinking about that more general claim about there being somebody with the evidence. Unfortunately, he's been kicked out the room. His internet's dodgy, so he'd make that case better than us. But just think about the basic cases. When is it allowed to retreat to that level of explanation? Sorry, that level of description of the evidence. When not? I think you just have to run through the maths and say in a principled way what you're doing. And I don't think there's any way of construing the crowd summoning case where the fine tuning becomes relevant. So I guess we just have to go through the maths.
Oh, we've got Kenny back.
Kenny,
welcome.
Kenny, can we just ask Kenny? Because the question that's being pressed on me is our evidence shouldn't be I, Philip Goff, exist, but somebody with my evidence exists. That's the claim. And so, and that undermines our argument. Yeah. I want to concede something before we finish as well to do with the video. Go on, Kenny.
Yeah. I do think that there are some subtle issues here about how to think about self-locating belief. It does seem important to me that my evidence can at least be cast in terms of I am making these observations. If we think that my evidence really is just equivalent to somebody with this evidence exists, then I agree that we get massive confirmation for a big, diverse multiverse, or actually maybe what we get. Yeah, we get massive confirmation, at least for a big multiverse where there are lots of people with my evidence. But now we have an argument for the multiverse that has nothing to do with fine-tuning whatsoever. It's just a lot more likely that there's going to be somebody who's, say, looking at a laptop right now, having a debate like this. If there are lots and lots and lots of people doing it, then if there's just a few. Okay. The evidence is just someone with my evidence exists. Actually, sorry, I do think I misspoke. So if it's just someone with my evidence exists, now I'm not seeing how we get any confirmation for the multiverse at all.
Darren, do you want to come on to this? Do you get evidence?
Right. So on that last point, I mean, so the idea is that, like starting from nothing, you've no idea if anyone exists, you've no idea how many universes there are. And if you're just told someone exists, there's someone out there, then the thought is, well, more likely to be lots of universes than fewer universes. So it sounded like you were agreeing in that point and then saying, well, actually our evidence is self-locating. If we don't know anything about whether anyone exists and we don't know how many universes there are, then just finding out there is some life, someone exists, that does confirm the multiverse. But it sounded like you weren't even sure about that.
So it might confirm the multiverse hypothesis, what is unclear to me is whether it confirms the multiverse hypothesis over the single universe hypothesis. I'd like to see that build out a bit more. I mean, just the fact that this universe exists, that confirms the multiverse hypothesis because it rules out one hypothesis incompatible with it. There are no universes. But it doesn't distinguish between the multiverse and the single universe hypothesis, which is what we're interested in.
Okay, Philip, you had a concession that you said you wanted to make.
I was going to, in a sense, concede on one point from the video,
okay,
where you made this point that in my Scientific American article, I said something like, "Oh, sorry, the ring phone." Don't worry, I just got distracted for a second. I said something like experts in probability have found that or something. And I guess there's two worries with this. Firstly, why wasn't I saying philosophers of probability? And secondly, it sort of sounds like I'm saying, this is established consensus. I didn't quite say that, but it sort of seems to be implied. And I agree, actually, there's something a bit misleading about that. I think it's just part of the ongoing thing I wrestle with all the time of trying to communicate philosophy to a broader audience, as people don't know what the hell it is. They think, well, it's just whatever you think. There's no rules to it. There's no expertise. And so if you could dress it up as sort of science or mathematics or something, then people are interested. And so it's the ongoing thing. One of my favorite lines from Jesus, to paraphrase slightly, have the brain of a snake and the heart of a dove. You should be pure in your motives, but you've got to kind of play the game a bit. And I wrestle with that with public philosophy, dumbing it down a bit. And then my peers say, "Oh, you've got that wrong, you idiots." And it's like, so I think I try to excuse myself. And actually, well, just Phil, you talk a lot about in your videos of, we're debunking this and debunking that. And maybe that's in the same field. It's like all of this is controversial, but maybe that's what you have to do to sort of, it's that compromise to try and get through to a broader audience. Anyway, nothing really to do with the debate.
Fair enough.
Amen to all of that, Philip.
Right. So listen, we're pretty much at almost 90 minutes now. So why don't we just go around the room, sum up where we think we've concluded, where the disagreement is, and then where we go from here. So Neil, why don't you do the first summing up, and we'll go to Philip.
I'm not convinced by the inverse gambler's fallacy objection to the multiverse explanation of fine-tuning for a variety of reasons. But I guess the takeaway for the audience is if that's a good objection, then it's an objection to many other scientific inferences that seem perfectly valid and that have brought us great results. So,
right. Okay,
yeah.
Kenny, you want to give us a quick sum up of where you think we're at?
Yeah, so I think that Philip and I have established that if we have any evidence for a multiverse, it's from the mere fact that we observe a universe and that fine-tuning has nothing whatsoever to do with it.
Okay, Darren, last thoughts.
Yeah, not easy to sum up. Lots of disagreement. I do think there's a really interesting subtle point regarding the exact role that fine-tuning is going to play, right? So even if you're a fan of the fine-tuning argument, you need to figure out exactly what fine-tuning is doing and why. So I think, that definitely is an open question. So, I'm looking forward to working through the details of Philip and Kenny's paper.
All right. Philip, last thought to you, and then we'll close up.
It's a very complex debate. I think we should drop our intuitions about what does or doesn't need explaining and just try to pin it down, go through the maths. I would just encourage people to think carefully about those three cases: the summoning case, the crowd summoning case, and the Jane case. I think the summoning case, which I think Neil is still stuck on, is just clearly not right. The crowd summoning case is right if we could have existed in another universe. And if that's right, fine-tuning just becomes irrelevant. So we still need it. We still need God to deal with it. If we couldn't have existed in another universe, the Jane case is relevant, and you just get no support for a multiverse there. So I just encourage people to think carefully through those three cases. Go through the maths if you can. It's an ongoing debate.
Right. Well, we're going to have to draw it to a close. What do you, the audience, think? We'd love to hear from you in the comments. And if you like this content, please like and subscribe. And so it's just left for me to thank our guests, Philip, Neil, Darren, and Kenny. Thanks a lot, guys.